is 1989. You're watching your Saturday morning cartoons when suddenly...
Nice job, hero.
Hey, excuse me, princess.
That's right, I'm talking about the infamous Legend of Zelda animated series, which at the time had a short run of only 13 episodes, but which 34 years later manages to live rent-free in so many of our heads. Okay, so I actually wasn't alive when the series first premiered, but I did watch the show on DVD when I was a kid, and then recently binge watched it on YouTube last week, when, after learning the news about the upcoming Zelda movie, I fell into a bit of a rabbit hole thinking about all the non-game Zelda media that's out there. In this video, I wanted to do a little breakdown of the series, some fun facts about production, and how this media can be analyzed in relation to the new Zelda movie. Which is to say, what lessons from this highly memeable show can be applied to a big-budget live-action film.
Oh boy, smooching time! Ah! Oh!
Just as a quick overall summary in case you've never seen the show, the series ran as a segment within the Super Mario Bros. Super Show and only lasted for one season. It was released around the time of the US debut of Zelda 2: Link's Adventure, and was supposed to be inspired by that game. The episodes are focused on Link and Zelda and their constant fight against Ganon and his minions as they attempt to protect Hyrule and the Triforce of Wisdom. One of the funniest and sometimes cringiest parts of the show is Link and Zelda's banter. Obviously, the infamous line, "Excuse me, princess," is way overused, and most of their interactions revolve around Link trying to get a kiss, but some of Zelda's zingers were genuinely funny.
You called for a hero, princess?
Yes, but I guess you'll have to do.
If you've been following my channel for a while though, you know how much I love a good pun, so take that with a grain of salt.
Is that what they call a royal flush?
Oh, I hate bad puns.
Something else you might know about me at this point is how much I love Zelda lore, and despite this being non-canon and generally ridiculous, there were some interesting lore-type things I figured were worth noting. First, the Triforce takes a bit of a different role in the series than what we're used to in the games. For one, there are only two pieces of the Triforce, making it a Biforce, I guess? At the time, this was somewhat lore accurate, as only the Triforces of Wisdom and Power had appeared in Zelda 1, and from production interviews, it sounds like they didn't have a full understanding of Zelda 2, where the Triforce of Courage made its first appearance. But even with this in mind, the Triforce's function does seem to be a little different than what we'd usually expect. Ganon and Zelda have the Triforce of Power and Wisdom in each of their respective castles, and the episodes revolve around Ganon trying to steal and unite the Triforces, because...
Whoever gets both Triforces will rule this land forever.
Thanks, Zelda. Although, Ganon does get both Triforces in episode 2, and nothing really happens, so it's unclear why he didn't just instantly win. As far as Triforce powers go, it's certainly not something that's passed through a bloodline of reincarnation, or something internalized once you touch it like in the games. To use Triforce powers, Zelda needs to have the Triforce on a chain like a magic balloon with her. The Triforce powers themselves are pretty nerfed. We see Zelda use it to make an ice wall, form a shield, and blast like 3 moblins. Otherwise, the two Triforces sit in their resting places in each castle, occasionally giving hints like an Alexa, if Alexa only spoke in rhymes.
To find your father, royal daughter, you must search beneath the water.
Oh, come on!
Also notably, the series introduces the concept of an evil jar, which is basically the explanation for where Ganon's minions go when Link and Zelda evaporate them in one hit. It's a giant jar filled with mist that Ganon can use to store and summon various monsters. This was pretty clearly done as a way to pacify networks and keep this kids show a kids show, as permanently killing bad guys would probably be too extreme. But it is sort of an interesting alternative to explanations like the Blood Moon resurrecting enemies, for example. As I continued to fall into this rabbit hole, I learned a few interesting tidbits about the production itself. First, with a few exceptions, the episodes were written by writer and story editor Bob Forward, or members of his family, like his mother, who pitched the story, and his sister, who was apparently only 16-17 at the time. As for the origin story of "Excuse me, princess," turns out we have Steve Martin to thank for that line, as the writers have credited this bit as their inspiration.
Well, excuse me!
And I know this part might be shocking to hear, but it turns out Nintendo was pretty hands-off with the production. It seems like their main goal was to use it as promotional material for Zelda 2, and since that hadn't been released in the States yet, all the production got to develop the show were a Japanese copy of the game, a VHS playthrough for the non-gamers on the staff, as well as a franchise Bible. Other than providing those materials, it doesn't seem like Nintendo had much interest in weighing in, so the writers kind of got to go rogue. Now, I want to get into the reason why I started researching the Zelda series in the first place, the upcoming Zelda movie. The Legend of Zelda animated series isn't the most well-developed or best executed piece of media out there, but it's fun for what it is. The dialogue is a little corny, the episodes are a little formulaic, and the animation inconsistencies show that this team was working on a budget. But again, given that they only had basically a game and a half to work with and were otherwise given free reign, they managed to make something that is pretty entertaining, even rewatching it as an adult. Obviously, the upcoming Zelda movie that's still in development is going to be an entirely different format. It's going to be live action for one thing, feature length instead of 15 minutes, and I'm sure it's going to have an astronomical budget by comparison. But up to this point, the series is one of the most notable depictions of Hyrule outside of the games, so I think there are some lessons that can be learned from it. The first, don't let Link talk. In its own way, the show does kind of pull this off because it's so incredibly corny and campy, but watching them back to back as I did, it became tremendously apparent how annoying Link's catchphrases are. Now, I can't imagine a world where this live-action Link would behave like animated Link, but I still stand by the fact that it's going to be so weird if he talks at all. But then again, not having your main character speak the entire time could get boring for a general audience, so it's likely they're going to supplement Link with another main character, which leads to my next point. They need to give Zelda a role in the story. Zelda, as a character, is at her best when she's a badass. In Wind Waker as a pirate queen, or Ocarina of Time as Sheik, she becomes so much more interesting of a character when she's contributing to the action. This might be a hot take, but I actually love the Zelda from the animated series. She occasionally falls into a damsel position, but for the most part, she's pretty capable of taking care of herself and Link, wielding weapons and going on adventures. And of course, I absolutely love her design. But overall, Zelda has the potential to be so interesting and dynamic, and I hope the producers of the movie take advantage of that. Props to the animated series for doing so 34 years ago.
Come on, Link!
My kind of girl. Completely crazy. Whoa!
The third lesson would be to bring authenticity from the games. Again, the animated series didn't have a ton to work with at the time, but from interviews with production staff, it seems like a lot of them had not played the game, and clearly Nintendo was pretty hands-off. That's not going to be the case with this movie, as it's going to have a much bigger budget, and Miyamoto has stated he's been in talks about the movie for over a decade. Based on their level of involvement and the overall positive reaction to the Mario movie, it seems like they know what they're doing now. But still, the more I think about the movie, the more questions I have. The first is, of course, what I think is on everyone's mind, the tone of the movie. This franchise obviously has games that run the gamut from silly to serious to totally dark, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of tone they go with. If Miyamoto is taking an approach similar to the Mario movie, which seemed to be targeting the broadest audience possible, I think we could expect something somewhat middle of the field with broad appeal, like an Ocarina of Time style story. However, the live-action nature of the movie does somewhat complicate that approach. In most of the games, Link uses a lot of weapons and does a lot of killing. The Zelda animated series had to skirt around that by mostly having the sword essentially function as a blaster that basically teleports the monsters back to Ganon's evil jar. That was admittedly a pretty silly workaround, and with sword techniques being so important in later versions of the game, I can't imagine we wouldn't see swords, arrows, etc. making contact with monsters. And with it being live action, I'd have to think it would be somewhat realistic, right? Zelda games don't tend to show a lot of blood. Even when you're doing violent things, the cartoonish nature allows it to feel less violent. And even at its scariest, the monsters disappear in a poof of smoke. So I'm having a little trouble reconciling what that would look like in live action. I was trying to think of media examples that are generally family-friendly-ish with sword fighting and violence, and I think this will have to be PG-13? Obviously, Star Wars operates on a different set of rules, being that they use lightsabers, but maybe Lord of the Rings could be a good comparison? If anyone has any comparable media examples of what you think a Zelda movie could look like, send them my way, because I'm genuinely curious. Overall though, I strongly believe that if we were going to get a Zelda movie, it should have been animated. I just feel like keeping it in that format would have helped preserve a lot of what makes the game so special stylistically, and would have sidestepped this question of violence completely. But again, it seems like Nintendo will be taking a very active role in this production, so as protective and apprehensive as I feel about the franchise, I guess my current state is let them cook? Worst case scenario is we get this guy again, and even that can be fun at times. Anyway, let me know what kind of movie you're hoping to see. Are you hoping for something gritty, something goofy, or something in between? As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
This place is a mess! I want it cleaned up! With your tongues!